Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Welcome back everyone to our continued reading of the Matn of Abi Shuja' radiallahu anhu in the Fiqh of the Madhab of Sayyidina Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu. In today's class, inshallah, we will backtrack just a little bit and round out our conversation about the fiqh of shortening the prayers. Shortening the prayers, that is when we are traveling. So we will review just a few of the rules that we learned and the parameters for shortening the prayer. And then we will move from there to discuss what is the logical, next topic, which is combining the prayers. So first there is the shortening of the prayers, making the 4 rak'ah prayers into 2 rak'ahs. Now we will talk about combining the prayers, which obviously only involve Dhuhr, Asr, and Maghrib and Isha in those pairings. So obviously Fajr is going to be its own prayer, and we will learn about some of the fiqh about that. And we will also end that discussion with a sort of unique position that the Shafi'i madhab has in regards to combining our prayers even if we are not traveling. In the case of the book, it's with inclement weather. So of course the wording of the book is going to be when it rains, but you can substitute rain for any type of inclement weather. It could be snow, it could be hail, it could be a hurricane, it could be a tornado, sandstorm. It's, any type of derivative, because all sorts of climates have different type of inclement weather. So what happens if you are a resident and you are at the mosque and you have this inclement type of weather? We will learn about some of the fiqh about combining the prayers in that case, and by extension we will look at actually the dalil in this case a little bit in some detail that is unique for the Shafi'i madhab. Following that, we will talk about Jum'ah prayer, Friday prayer, and we will learn the difference between what makes the Jum'ah obligatory and then who is Jum'ah obligatory for. So there are two different conversation points. In today's class, we are going to learn about what are the things that cause the Jum'ah to be an obligation. So instead of dhuhr, the 4 rak'ahs of dhuhr, you have to go to the mosque, hear the khutbah, and listen to the two, and then pray the 2 rak'ahs. And then in the next class, when we continue the conversation of Jum'ah, we will learn that not all the people that attend the Jum'ah are equal. So we are looking for a certain number of people that fulfill a certain criteria, that fulfill their requirements for Jum'ah. So that's something that we will talk in the next class. But today we will talk about the things that make the Jum'ah itself an obligation. Let us begin, as we always begin, by looking at the matn in the text. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. قال رضي الله عنه ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. ويجوز للمسافر أن يجمع بين الظهر والعصر في وقت أيهما شاء، وبين المغرب والعشاء في وقت أيهما شاء، ويجوز للحاضر في المطر أن يجمع بينهما في وقت الأولى منهما. فصل في صلاة الجمعة. وشرائط وجوب الجمعة 7 أشياء: الإسلام والبلوغ، العقل والحرية، الذكورية والصحة والاستيطان. وشرائط فعلها 3: أن تكون البلد مصرا أو قرية، وأن يكون العدد 40 من أهل الجمعة، وأن يكون الوقت باقيا. Actually, that's a little bit extra, but it's okay that I read that. So let us read the English translation. Travelers are entitled to combine the noon and mid-afternoon prayer, Dhuhr and Asr, during either of the time they choose, and the sunset and the night prayer, the Maghrib and the Isha prayer, during either of the times they choose. Residents are entitled to combine the 2 sets of prayers during the first time of them when there is rain. Friday prayer. Conditions obligating the Friday prayer. There are 7 conditions that cause the Friday prayer to be obligatory. When the individual is a Muslim, mature, of sound mind, free, male, of sound health, and a resident. Now let us look at some of the adillah that will surround our discussion, inshallah, today. In regards to combining the prayer, Ibn Abbas reports, as is narrated in Bukhari, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to combine between Dhuhr and Asr while traveling, and between Maghrib and Isha. So that's a clear text in Bukhari. Now, as far as the combining in the rain situation, there is the hadith of Ibn Abbas also that's narrated in Bukhari, that the Prophet ﷺ combined Dhuhr and Asr, Maghrib and Isha in Medina, meaning he wasn't traveling. So one of the companions asked Ibn Abbas, maybe it was raining, and he responded, perhaps, yes. And then in the narration of the same hadith in Muslim, which is the main text that we use to discuss this point, the narration of Muslim, في غير خوف ولا سفر. So the Prophet ﷺ combined Dhuhr and Asr, Maghrib and Isha in Medina, not for purposes of fear or for purposes of travel. So that we will come back to that, inshallah. That's a very important text because it's a text that not many of the other hadith scholars or madhahib accept, but it is a text that is sound. There's no doubt in its soundness. It has a narration in Muslim and Bukhari, and it's one of those, I don't want to say weird, but one of those unique hadith where nobody denounces its sahihness, but because of the oddity of the fiqh implications, very few of the mujtahids took it. But Imam al-Shafi'i, alhamdulillah, did take it, and we'll learn why that's important. Let's just continue our discussion of the adillah. Okay, the thing about Jum'ah, what makes Jum'ah an obligation? يا أيها الذين آمنوا إذا نودي للصلاة من يوم الجمعة فاسعوا إلى ذكر الله وذروا البيع. So this is a clear command in Surah Al-Jum'ah that when you hear the call for the Friday prayer, rush to the prayer and shut down your shops for the time of the prayer. So it is an obligation. As an obligation, it is established. As far as the things of Islam, being a Muslim, being mature, sound mind, etc., those are the things of taklif that we talked about earlier on in our discussion of fiqh, so we kind of know that this is going to be something that is repeated. One of the key aspects of this is the being a resident. Being a resident, meaning not being in a state of travel. The Prophet, well, one hadith about the men part is that the Prophet is narrated by Tariq ibn Shihab, that the Prophet said, and this is in Dawood, الجمعة حق واجب على كل مسلم في جماعة إلا أربعة. The Friday prayer is an obligation for all groups of Muslims except for 4. عبد مملوك, a slave, أو امرأة, a woman, أو صبي, or a child, أو مريض, or somebody who's sick. Now we will learn that doesn't mean these people can't pray Jummah. It means that the minimum number that we need, which in the Shafi'i madhab is 40, including the Imam, the minimum number of people that we need for the Jummah to be valid cannot include these people. But these people can come to pray, and no doubt these people do come and pray Jummah. Especially in the modern world, the mosques are, or at least in Muslim minority communities, the mosques are full of women and young people and things like that. And that's a great thing. But from the fiqh point of view, their presence means something else. And that's an important distinction. We'll come back on all of these. I just want to go through some of the adillah. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, as is narrated by Jabir, as is found in the collection of Ad-Daraqutni, "Man kana yu'minu billahi wal yawm al-akhir," whoever believes in Allah on the last day, فَعَلَيْهِ الْجُمْعَةَ يَوْمَ الْجُمْعَةِ. So he has the Jum'ah prayer on the Friday prayer, إِلَّا مَرِيض أو musafir, except the person who is sick, who is traveling, or a woman or a child, or a slave. Okay, so I'm not finding the adilla that I wanted to about. Uh, the Jummah being in a city. That's actually going to come in the next class. I was confused. Here he's talking about not being in a state of traveling. So you remember when we talked last time, this whole we began by traveling, which we'll come back to very shortly. And we said that traveling is a state, and we talked about how you enter into that state. If you are in the state of traveling, then there is no Jummah for you. It doesn't mean that you can't, if you happen to be by the mosque where you're visiting to stop by and pray, you can stop by and pray Jummah, but it doesn't count for you. Rather, the Jummah what makes it obligatory is that the person, other than the things that we've just mentioned, a free man, etc., is that they are a muqim, that they are a resident of this area, because the state of travel lessens the obligation on the prayer responsibilities versus the person who is a muqim. So that's something that we're going to spend some time talking about towards the end of our lecture today, because it's very important that we understand. Okay, now let us return to the text, inshallah. Let me just find my page in the Hashiyah. I like to have that open as we go along. And let us just backtrack just a little bit. We began in the last class, the last lecture, series of lectures, talking about shortening the prayer. Okay? And we talked about, the last thing that we said is that the one shortening the prayer doesn't lead the resident, that the resident doesn't lead the one shortening the prayer, etc. And then, okay, and then he goes to talk about combining. Now, when it comes to shortening and combining, the reason we discuss them in the section of travel is because usually, shortening can only happen, as we said, during the travel. Whereas combining, as we will come to see, there might be some situations outside of what is mentioned specifically in the text for combining, but it also is a function of something that happens when you are in the state of travel, which is why he is talking about it in this section together, the shortening and the combining. And I'll pick that up in the next clip, inshallah. So he says, rahimahullah, about combining, that the travelers are entitled to combine, so it's something that you can choose to do or choose not to do. What can you combine? Dhuhr and Asr. You can bring Asr up to Dhuhr, or you can delay Dhuhr to Asr. Maghrib and Isha. You can bring Isha up to Maghrib, or you can delay Maghrib to Isha. If you bring the prayer up, if you bring Asr up, then you have to pray them in order. You have to pray Dhuhr first and then Asr. If you bring Isha up to Maghrib, then you have to pray Maghrib first and then Isha. If you delay the prayers, you delay Dhuhr till Asr, then you can pray them in any order that you want, but the sunnah, or I won't say the sunnah, it's preferable that you pray Dhuhr before Asr. So if we were to have some kind of Islamic trivia, we could ask a question, what are the situations in which the prayers would be prayed not in order? One of them would be, one answer would be when you delay the prayer due to traveling, you can switch the order of the prayer. So if I delayed Dhuhr to Asr, I can pray Asr first and then following it by Dhuhr. Usually people are not going to do that. In the practice of the deen, usually people just pray things in order because we have like a psychological thing inside us that we don't feel so comfortable when we pray out of order. It seems like something is wrong. But it's important to note that that is possible. Okay? Now, Combining the prayers, we said, only concern the couplets of Dhuhr and Asr as one unit, and Maghrib and Isha. Of course, Fajr is Fajr, and there's no shortening and there's no delaying or anything like that. Now, let us talk a little bit about the niyyah, about the intention behind the combining. This will be a little technical, but you guys can handle it, inshallah. If I'm going to stand to pray Salat al-Dhuhr in Dhuhr time and bring Asr up, when I begin the Allahu Akbar for Dhuhr, I have to have the intention that I am going to combine with it Asr prayer. If I want to delay Dhuhr till Asr prayer, then at some time during the Dhuhr time, I should have the intention that I'm delaying Dhuhr until Asr. Technically, there's a difference of opinion amongst the usulis, but this is what I'm presenting to you, the safer option from the point of view of the deen, is that I'm not going to just let the prayer time pass and do, I'll just pray it later. Rather, I'm going to, on purpose, when I see my phone beep for Dhuhr, or I hear the adhan for Dhuhr and I'm traveling, at that moment, I have my intention to delay it with Asr. Same thing, the same conversation would happen with Maghrib and Isha. If I delay the prayer, so let's go with Dhuhr, Dhuhr time has come in, I have made an intention to delay Dhuhr till Asr. Then when Asr time comes, when I'm ready to pray my combined Dhuhr and Asr together, when I stand to say Allahu Akbar, to pray Dhuhr first, or I could pray Asr first, as we know, I have the intention that I'm praying two prayers that are combined. The next, and the same conversation or the same fiqh applies to Maghrib and Isha. Now, what about the gap of time between both prayers? Whether I bring Asr to Dhuhr, or I delay Dhuhr to Asr, or I bring Isha to Maghrib, or I delay Maghrib to Isha, whatever the combination is, I cannot let the gap between the two prayers be too long. Too long is defined as the time it would take somebody to pray 2 rak'ahs of sunnah rather quickly. So I prayed Salatul Dhuhr with the intention that I'm going to bring Asr to it. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I need to grab a glass of water. My throat is parched. Or I need to use the bathroom very quickly and renew my wudu. Or while we were praying, the phone was ringing non-stop. So I just want to see, is there something wrong with our travel arrangements? And I look at the phone or something. So as long as the gap is not too long, you can continue and combine the prayer. Some people, they make the mistake of making the gap too long. And, because I travel frequently, I always observe in airports, like masallas in airports and things like that. Unfortunately, people do have weird habits when it comes to this. I don't know where it comes from. But I have seen people really, from my limited knowledge of fiqh, it seems like they've messed up their situation by the gap being too long. So another short gap would be, you tell the people behind you, maybe you're all traveling because you're like in an airport, but you don't know each other. So I'm going to stand and pray Asr. Does anyone want to pray Asr with me? Jama taqdeem. And somebody might say yes or no. So that type of gap, that's okay because it's not too long. But if the gap becomes too long, then you have severed it. And this goes back to the philosophy of the muwalah that we talked about from the very beginning of our fiqh discussion, that the implied cadence of acts of worship in Islam is that they are done continuously. So when we talk about combining, the assumption is that one comes after the other. When we talk about wudu, the assumption is that you wash one body part after the other. When the Prophet ﷺ used to say Subhanallah 33, Alhamdulillah 33, Allahu Akbar 33 after prayer, the assumption is he did them one after the other. That's just the assumption. So this is one of those meta principles that you might not find it written the way I'm expressing it, but it certainly is one of the principles of the deen that's important to keep in mind. Okay, so hopefully now we've learned a little bit about the combining and the fiqh behind it. And then he says residents are entitled to combine two sets of prayers, meaning Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib and Isha, during the first time of them when it rains. So this rukhsa is limited to bringing up the later prayer to the early prayer. It doesn't work to delay. And you can substitute rain for inclement weather. And as I mentioned in the narration of Muslim, which even in the Hashia, that's the verbiage that the Shafi'is tend to use. وَزَادَ Muslim, in the narration of Muslim, مِنْ غَيْرِ خَوْفٍ وَلَا سَفَرٍ, that the Prophet ﷺ did this without fear or without travel. قال الشافعي كمالك أرى ذلك في المطر. And Imam al-Shafi'i radiallahu anhu, he said, commenting about this hadith, as did his Shaykh Imam Malik radiallahu anhu, I see this, or I understand this to be in the situation of rain. Now, that the time in Medina, rain is inclement weather, but it depends where you live in the world. There are other types of inclement weather. So the other types of inclement weather will do ilhaq, they will be joined with the same hukum of rain. So you can add to it snow, hail, heavy winds, it's too cold or it's way too hot. There's a heat wave or a cold wave. Those are also inclement weathers. As long as that inclement weather episode happens at the first prayer time, so in this case, dhuhr time, let's just use that as an example, and it lasts throughout the 4 rak'ahs of dhuhr, because here we're talking about combining while you are resident. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. It's still inclement weather, then we can stand up, make an iqamah, and pray the second prayer, Salatul Asr. If we are at the masjid, that way we have lessened the burden and the danger of people coming to the mosque during the inclement weather situation. I have done this myself many times in North America, praying Jum'ah, for example, and I remember one time I was praying, and the minute I stood up to give the khutbah, the snow started coming down very heavily. I made the khutbah very short. I think the khutbah was like 2 minutes long, and then I stood up, we did the iqamah, we prayed Asr. By the time we finished, there was already maybe half of a foot, 4 to 6 inches worth of snow on the ground. So these things do happen, and you need to take action, especially if you are a leader in the community, to prevent people from harming themselves. So the same thing would apply to Maghrib and Isha. If we started praying Maghrib prayer and then an inclement weather episode happened while we started the Allahu Akbar of Maghrib, and it lasted for the duration of the prayer, then the assumption is it will continue. We don't have to be weather genius, but it seems that things are bad and it's pouring outside. We're going to pray the Isha, and then people can be sent home and things like that. You can't do this when you're in your house. He's talking about in the masjid situation. Related to this fiqh is another opinion of the modern Shafi'is, that it is permissible for people that live in non-Muslim as Muslim minorities to combine their prayers based on this hadith. So that is a modern Shafi'i or a contemporary Shafi'i fatwa based on this hadith of Ibn Abbas in Sahih Muslim, that this is not limited to inclement weather, but because due to the difficulty of finding places to pray and the distances, and if you don't live in a Muslim majority country, that this would be a position that you can follow moving forward, and this is of great ease. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Okay, and then lastly for today's class, let us turn to Salatul Jumu'ah, Friday prayer. As we know, Friday is one of the great days of the week, and there are many, many traditions that talk about Friday. It was the day in which the earth was created. It was the day in which Adam was expelled from the paradise. It was the day in which Adam and Eve found each other. Actually, in the Hashia, he advances the argument that Adam and Eve met in Sri Lanka, the land of Serendib, which is one of the old Arabic words for Sri Lanka, Serendib. And from the Arabic word Serendib comes the English word serendipitous. And the story behind that, just as a small, really nice tangent, is that when the English went to Ceylon or Sri Lanka, they were so surprised at how beautiful the people were, how beautiful the women were, how beautiful the fruit was, how beautiful the ocean. So they coined this word based on what the Arabs called it, serendib, that to find something surprisingly good is an act of serendipity. That's where that word comes from. And one of the traditions we have is that when Adam and Eve reunited, they reunited in Serendib. Actually in Sri Lanka, there is a mountain that has a footprint that's attributed to Adam alayhi salam. Another story is that they found each other in the plain of Arafah, outside of Mecca. But the important thing for our purposes is that it happened on a Friday. So Friday is a great day of great blessings. It's a weekly Eid, as the Prophet ﷺ taught us. Of course, the greatest day from the point of view of days is the day of Arafah. And the greatest of evenings, the greatest of eves is the night in which we commemorate the birth of the Prophet ﷺ. And we would advance that even more than Laylatul Qadr. But all of these days have merit, and it's not to cancel out the other days. They're all great, but since we're talking about Friday, it is a great day. It is the day in which we gather together as a community, in which we hear something hopefully positive about our deen, to reconnect us with our deen. It's an opportunity to get together with friends, colleagues, and neighbors. Maybe you don't see these people except on Fridays. So it's a special day. It's, as we will learn the fiqh of it, it is a communal day. One of the sunnahs of Friday, for example, is for us to take a shower, or a ghusl, which I think he will talk about later. Yeah. And one of the interesting hadith about that is that the companions were complaining that the mosque smelled bad on Friday because people had not taken care of themselves. So the Prophet ﷺ said, no, you're meeting each other on this special day. You need to take a shower or take a bath and beautify yourself and put perfume and things like that. So it's a day, if you have an event in which you have to wash for, dress for, and smell nice for, that means it's an important event. It's a special event. And that's essentially what the Friday is for us on a weekly basis. But before we talk about all those nice things, let us come back to the ground of fiqh to learn some of the fiqh around this. So first he says that there are 7 conditions that cause Friday to be obligatory. So we want to learn what makes Friday, what makes it wajib. What are the shurut of the wujub of Jummah? First, because I might be in a situation in which it's not obligatory. So that's the first thing he's going to discuss. The first thing is that if the first condition that makes Friday obligatory is that you're a Muslim. Obviously, there is no Jummah for non-Muslims or for people not of our faith. Number 2 is that it's obligatory for people that are mature, meaning it's not obligatory for people below the age of puberty. So if you're below the age of puberty, again, it doesn't mean that they can't come to the mosque. It means it's not an obligation for them to come to the mosque. Number 3 is that they are of sound mind. Now, when we talked about sanity and insanity, we talked about temporary modes of insanity and permanent modes of insanity. So the assumption here is that you have neither, that you are within your rational faculty. If so, then it is an obligation to go and pray Jummah. And then number 4 is that you are free. So the Jummah is not obligatory for the slave. Certainly slaves would pray Salatul Jummah, and the mosque would be filled with all of the others that I'm mentioning, but it's not an obligation. This will become clear when we talk about the minimum number that makes the Jummah valid. So if you are the other from this list, your presence does not count towards that magic number of 40. That's why it's important to learn this. And then after that is that you are a male. So there is no obligation for Jummah for the female. Of course, if the woman has her monthly cycle, then she can't go for obvious reasons. But even if she doesn't, she is not obligated to go to the Jummah. You can't prevent her from going. There's nothing wrong with her from going. What we're saying is that her presence is not required at Jummah, whereas the man's presence is required at Jummah. And then after that, I think it would be 6, is sound health. So somebody who's sick, either temporarily or permanent. Someone who is, even the books of fiqh say people who are too overweight, that can't make it to the mosque. People who have difficulty walking, people who need assistance, people who can't, not only they can't pray standing up, but it's very hard for them to pray sitting down. It's very hard for them to get up the steps of the mosque. All of those types of things would be the opposite of sound health. Those type of people, if you find yourself in that situation, then the Jummah is not an obligation for you at that moment. Just wanted to find something about the Sihha. Okay. And then the other one that he mentions, which is quite important for our purposes, is a resident. A resident here means somebody who is not in the state of travel. It doesn't just mean somebody who has a home here, because you could be in an extended visit, but you would still be considered a resident if your travel is less than 3 days. I don't know if we got a chance to talk about the length of travel. Maybe I might have missed that, and I apologize if I do. But what is the length of the travel? The length of the travel is 3 days, not including the traveling going to your destination and the traveling coming back. So if I'm traveling from my city to a city that's far away, and I plan to stay there for 5 days, the minute I enter into the city limits of that city, I am no longer in the state of travel. From the fiqh point of view, I am a resident. Even though I'm traveling in the customary sense because I don't live there and I'm staying in a hotel or at a friend's house or something like that. I mean, obviously I don't live there, but from the point of view of the state of travel versus the state of residence, that person will become a resident. So that person, when they show up in that city A and they're there for 5 days for work or whatever, then the Jummah would be an obligation for them to attend. Of course, if they can't attend because of work, that's something else. But here we're just talking about the pure fiqh point of view. Now, let's change that scenario. I'm traveling from my home to city A. It's 100 kilometers away, and I'm only going to be there for 2 days. So that means the entirety when I'm there, I'm in the state of travel. And I'm leaving on a Thursday and I arrive on a Friday. It doesn't matter. I arrive on a Friday, but I'm in the state of travel, so Jummah is not an obligation for me. I certainly can go to Jummah, but if I go to Jummah, my presence does not count towards the number 40 that we need for the Jummah to be valid in the Shafi'i madhab. So these first groups of 7, these first 7 conditions talk about who is obliged to pray Jummah. In the next class, we will learn about what makes the Jummah valid itself, which is another group of things that we need to learn. When those two happen, then we have the Jummah prayer. When they don't happen, then there is no there is no Jummah prayer. So the idea of the residency is important because sometimes in the literature there's a little bit of confusion about what that means. But inshallah, when we get to the next class, when we talk about the rest of and conclude the Jummah discussion, inshallah, it will all be clear. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, in today's class, we were able to conclude our discussion of shortening and combining our prayers as is a function of travel. And I mentioned at the very end of the last clip something that we might have forgotten to mention before, which is that the minimal travel is 3 days, not including the day that you're traveling to the place and the day that you're coming back. So in that scenario, you could have a total of 5 days if 2 of those days are the in-transit days. We also learned that in the Shafi'i madhab, Imam al-Shafi'i, he took the hadith of Ibn Abbas that's narrated in Muslim seriously and acted upon it, allowing the option to combine the prayer in the presence of inclement weather in the mosque in the first prayer. So bringing Asr up to Dhuhr and or bringing Isha up to Maghrib. But that this is not necessarily meant or not meant for people who are praying at home or on their own, but this is meant for the Jama'ah situation to keep in mind the inclement weather condition that is outside and therefore help people stay away from harm's way. We also talked very briefly about this being extended by contemporary Shafi'i muftis to help Muslim minorities, people that live in non-Muslim lands, that this is an opinion that they can follow ongoingly. They can ongoingly combine their prayers, Dhuhr and Asr, in either time, by the way, or Maghrib and Isha in either time, to help facilitate the ease of their prayer, because there might be difficult to find prayer spots or places to make wudu and things like that, meaning the country's infrastructure might not be compatible for that. Following that, we started our discussion about Friday. We talked a little bit in the beginning about the importance of Friday and some of the interesting traditions that we have about the blessings of the day of Friday. And then turning into the fiqh discussion, we looked at the 7 conditions that make the Jummah obligatory for people. 2 of the ones that they're pretty standard, but 2 of the ones that are really important that stand out are health. So anything that would preclude somebody from praying a regular Jama'ah prayer in the mosque, that would also preclude them from praying the Jummah prayer. They would be excused from the Jummah prayer. And also related to that is the concept of residency, that somebody is a resident where they are in a state of residency, not in a state of travel. And we gave some examples to show how that might be the case, and how if you are in a state of travel, then the Jummah is not an obligation for you. And in the next class, inshallah, we will continue the discussion of Jummah, and we will revisit some of these conditions, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.